How do you like STEM apples with Dave Stevens and Dr. Brad Miller? We have our
Hello.
very first guest, which I'm really excited about. Dr. Miller, you know this person, so please introduce him for us.
Well, known through email and correspondence for a competition, but we'd like to welcome Dr. Jason Benedict to the show today.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here with you guys.
Now, you are a professor at the University of Buffalo, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you teach chemistry.
Yeah, professor in the Department of Chemistry. That's
I
right.
apologize, professor.
Yep.
At the high school level, teaches just as that's what we do.
So technically associate professor, but yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but you do research, right?
Yes. Yeah, I run a research group for sure.
And from what little I've read, you have like the Benedict Labs. Is that like your own room at the University of Buffalo?
It's our lab space. So we have a handful of rooms full of all sorts of graduate students and instrumentation and chemicals and pretty much everything you'd expect to see in a research lab. Yep.
Oh, that's so cool. That's awesome. That's fantastic. I'm really jazzed to have you join us. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time and letting us talk about all the things that you have going on there in Buffalo, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Dr. Miller.
So, when we started talking about this, and our goal of this podcast is to, or whatever we're calling this,
right,
is to find ways to kind of just show our students other ways STEM can be applied to them. Because being both in math and for me chemistry, we're always trying to find these different ways to motivate our students. Because I know I'm seeing a lot of students who are in the classes because they have to take more science just to get the graduation credit, and trying to get them excited is our goal. And so my thought was, why not the first person we reach out to be someone who provides me with a couple weeks during the fall to get the students excited about just doing some science.
Yeah, no, getting kids interested in science is really so important. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm a professor. I do my normal gig. We do a lot of the cutting edge research and everything like that. But really, grad students are the lifeblood of our research group. And before they're grad students, they're undergrads. And before they're undergrads, they're in high school and on down the chain. And that's it. We need to keep the supply line full. We need kids to be interested in STEM activities and science, and really just curiosity and pursuit of the truth. And so, that's one reason that I came up with the crystal growing competition, is to be able to have an impact beyond just my research and what I do at UB. And to directly interact with, kids K through 12. And so, came up with this idea. Like, look, my research involves crystals, the study of crystals, growing new crystals that are interesting from material science. And I love growing and studying crystals. It's a lot of fun. And I said, hey, and in fact, the Canadians had a similar contest. I said, hey, you know what? I bet this will translate into the United States. And so I got to it, and the contest was born. This is going to be the 10th year of the contest. I still can't believe it's 10 years in. But the fact is, parents, educators, and importantly, the kids really enjoy growing crystals, right? There's, Brad, you've done it a few times. Mm-hmm. There's nothing quite so magical as plucking one of these big crystals out of, doing all the hard work and then plucking one of these things out and getting to see it. It's really magical. And I hopefully it's just as magical for everyone out there that participates in the contest.
Well, one of the questions I had was like, how did you come up with this idea? And that you kind of went over that. It's like, just falls right into what you do. But I can really piggyback on that of my son is a second grader this year. And for the last 2 years, he's competed and he has had so much fun with it. And I've actually, my daughter, who's a kindergarten this year, so I'm going to have her participate as well. But we go home and start working on it some nights, and she starts crying because she's not old enough to participate. And I'm like, well, you can, but we'll just wait until they're there. And so,
Yeah, it sounds like my daughters, both of them, they're allowed to grow crystals, but they can't participate. And they're like, we want. sorry, conflict of interest.
Yeah, I get that. But yeah, unfortunately during COVID time, we had a little bit more trouble getting some participation, at least on my end, because just all the rules we had to go through. But the last couple of years, I've seen a little bit more of an uptick again, and I've had up to like 25 students one year compete, and it was just great to see that they were excited about something that was science based. And I have to say I'm so glad that I saw this, because I actually saw this at my old school in the chemical and engineering news, the news scripts part, and I was like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
How many entries, I guess, do you get every year for this competition?
So it's tough to put an exact number on it, just because of the nature of how we run the contest and how people sign up and things like that. But it's absolutely in the thousands.
Oh, wow.
There's thousands of kids and educators all across the country doing this. And sort of, Brad, to your point, one really cool thing about this contest that sets it up a little bit different than the Canadian contest and things like that. So there's a few of these around the globe. They're not everywhere, but there are a handful of them. And one thing we really like about this contest is how scalable it is. So this can be one kid in one classroom doing whatever. It can be a whole classroom. It can be a whole grade. It can be as big as folks want to make it. But again, it can also be small. And what else is really neat is it's open to homeschoolers. So we actually have a fair amount of homeschool networks that plug into this thing and participate as well. And so it's really great. And that was my whole thing, was trying to expand this. You were asking a little bit how it started. At first I was like, oh, I'm going to have the Buffalo crystal growing competition. And then I was like, well, what about the people in Rochester and okay, Western New York? And then when it came time to try to get some money and to do this, I basically had the American Crystallographic Association, which is a nationwide organization, say, hey, we'd love to support this, but we're a national organization. Do you think you can do something national? And I was like, I don't know. And there's a bit more to fill in, but ultimately we decided to go national. And we ship alum all over the country, and people all across the country are participating in the contest. It's so exciting.
Now, the alum that you send out, is that the same stuff I can get in the grocery store that I put in my pickle jar to keep the pickles fresh?
It's probably the same chemical, or largely the same chemical. But what we do send out, so it's potassium aluminum sulfate, technically dodecahydrate, and this is a reagent grade chemical that we get from a chemical company and we send out. But yeah, that's one reason we choose to use alum, is because it's found in food. It's basically non-toxic. It's colorless, so if people spill it, it's not too bad to clean up. It's not too bad to throw away. You can throw it away. Especially because we're dealing with K through 12. There are other crystalline materials where you can grow big, giant, beautiful crystals. But they've all got their pros and cons. And another cool thing about alum is it's basically, once you grow the crystal, it's stable forever. And so we have a shelf at UB with thousands, probably in the thousands of crystals that have been sent in by, again, folks all over the country. It's all on display, all the winners and everything like that. Yeah.
That's so cool. What's the largest alum crystal that you personally have ever grown?
Yeah, I've got a couple that I've grown. I hate to do it. Tell you what. Let me hit pause.
No,
I should have anticipated.
No, don't. No, you go. You go. This guy is so cool, dude.
Told you.
Yeah. What a cool find, man. Thank you so much for putting this together, Dr. Miller. I love it, dude. What a cool dude.
I apologize. I should have anticipated the question, but here we go.
It's good.
This is Bart. It is named after my PhD supervisor, who's now at NYU.
And Bart Carr, isn't it?
Bart Carr. That's right. That's right. And And here it is. It's
Wow.
What? Are you
it-
serious?
that's a big crystal. It's pretty hefty.
Have you gotten the mass of that before?
You know, I feel like I did. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I would not be surprised if this thing's pushing like a kilogram, maybe half a kilo at least. It's pretty big. I mean, you can see it's the size of a softball. It's pretty awesome.
How many faces does that solid have?
The primary faces, it's got 8, but you will notice other faceting sometimes on the tips of this thing. So, and that's part of the contest. So the ideal form of this thing, this particular substance, is an octahedron. And so that's what the contestants are trying to grow. And depending on the growth conditions, you might grow an octahedron. If people aren't suspending it, it looks more like a plate. And sometimes people can get some other shapes and sizes depending on the growth conditions. But that's what makes the crystal growing competition a competition.
Right.
Is sometimes these things, nature does some weird stuff sometimes.
So while you got a great size there, the clarity, you gotta lose a little points on the clarity.
Bart would lose a few clarity points.
So for future reference coming up in about a month or so, I know you have your algorithm, but is clarity better or size better? Because I get that question all the time.
Yeah, so we actually have a formula in the handbook that describes like exactly what we do, and we've got the 5 categories that we score on these things, and they're basically worth 2 points apiece. So you've got clarity, you've got the flat, the ideal shape, you've got flat faces, sharp edges, and then the presence of occlusions, which is a little bit different than clarity. Clarity is sort of a kind of a muddiness to it, but occlusions are when you've got sort of bigger macroscopic either objects in there or solvent pockets or something like that. And so those things add up to give you a quality score of a maximum of 10. And then that gets multiplied by the logarithm of the mass. And so it's technically the mass plus 1. That winds up with the overall score. So the mass does factor in, but it comes in logarithmically, so it tamps it down a little bit. But yeah, it said one reason for that is it's fairly straightforward to grow a beautiful small crystal. As Brad, I'm sure you can attest to.
Yes, you pull some out,
it's pretty straightforward to grow a beautiful small crystal. It's much harder to grow a big, beautiful crystal. And so this does, if you do grow a pretty large crystal that maybe isn't quite as beautiful as a smaller one, the bigger one can win just because it's more massive and you've managed to grow a larger crystal. But that said, we certainly get some entries which we'll just say don't have the highest quality scores. And even though they're massive, they'll be beat by smaller, higher quality crystals.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That is so cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, is there a market for alum crystals like this, or is it like really just a niche to get? Is it like a gateway crystal, so to speak, where it gets you into like some other crystals?
Yeah, I think it's probably more of a gateway crystal. I mean, look, I'm on social media. People sell crystals of anything, and people sell a lot of things that probably aren't crystals as crystals.
Right.
But alum itself, because it dissolves in water, you're going to have a tough time making jewelry out of it, at least jewelry that's going to be very stable. I've seen things where people try to, put nail polish on it and things like that and potentially turn some other crystals into wearable jewelry. But, I think the lifetime on that is probably not tremendously great. You're better off with a piece of quartz or something like that. But yeah, so this is more just to give so if we talk about quartz, right, a lot of the crystals that are gemstones are not going to be something someone is making in a K through 12 lab. Now, I'm sure there could be an, someone's watching this take exception, like, oh no, we make sapphire in lab. Oh, okay, you got, that's a pretty awesome lab. Diamond, but a lot of that stuff takes really high temperatures, really specialized equipment. And so for the crystal growing competition, you just really need a hot plate and some alum and some water, and you're pretty good to go. Now, the more attention you pay to controlling your circumstances in the environment, the better a crystal you'll grow. But in terms of the basics, if you dissolve that alum and let it evaporate, you're getting crystals. They might be bigger, they might be smaller, but you're getting crystals with alum.
So all right. So you hinted at like quartz and stuff. So when you talk about crystals, in my mind, I'm thinking about like my son getting getting a rock on a hike or whatever, and then we break it open and there's these gorgeous multicolored crystals inside. So where's the line of demarcation from geology to chemistry?
It can be very blurry. In fact, when I was a grad student, I used to do a lot of work for geologists who were interested in looking at particular directions, and actually they were measuring sound waves through particular directions in crystals. And so they would come to me, and I would be able to take their crystal and orient it, and then they could make their measurements that they needed to make. So it's very similar. And this is where if we were out hiking together and you picked up a stone, a rock, or you cracked open that geode and said, hey, what is that? I could take a educated guess, but if you really want to know, you should probably talk to a geode. Although that said, if you really want to know, I could break off a little piece and take it to my lab and get the crystal structure and tell you what it is.
That's awesome. It's so cool. So with natural occurring crystals, have you ever wanted to go to Mexico and see the giant crystal cave? Two, have you actually gone? Like, do you know? Have you been?
I know exactly what you're talking about, and I haven't gone. I've seen pictures. It is stunning.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's one of those bucket list things. Although I think they're cutting back the amount of people that get to go. And
right. The conditions are just the conditions are incredible.
Yeah, super humid, everything like that, formed over hundreds of thousands, millions of years. Yeah, they're absolutely gorgeous crystals. And yeah, I always get totally enamored. In fact, my daughter and I recently took a trip to New York City, and we went to the American History Museum, and there was a crystal. We kind of saved it to the end. It was like running out of time, and it was like, oh, let's see the crystals. And it was like the worst mistake because it was incredible. And we could have spent the whole day there. Truly a stunning display of natural crystals sort of in their own little environment, and then also cut gemstones and everything. I mean, it was a mistake to save that till last. Although
I'm sure
if we would have done that first, we might not have seen anything else. So
so kind of taking this back to the idea that we're trying to get people interested, or students interested in STEM ideas. When did you actually decide, you know what, I want to be a chemist? Or when did you get really excited about science? What point in your life did that happen?
Yeah. So I remember it pretty distinctly. For me, it was in high school. My high school chemistry teacher was Dr. Davis, and we had a lab where we needed to determine the stoichiometry of hydration of a copper chloride salt. It was copper chloride, I don't know, pentahydrate or heptahydrate or something like that. And beautiful green crystals. You go mass it out, throw it in a crucible, and heat it up. And we did just that, except we must have heated it too much. It basically became black and sort of molten, and then green gas started pouring out of it. Ooh. And like our eyes were burning, and oh my God. So yes, we had generated chlorine gas and had to evacuate the lab. And at least at our school back in the day, there were no fume hoods, so everyone was just doing this on Bunsen burners out on lab benches. And but that was just such a like cool experience that I was like, oh man, I think I want to do chemistry, and there that was off to the races after that. So I basically almost poisoned everyone with chlorine gas, and that's what inspired me to go into chemistry.
Yeah, just finding out that you can, hurt lots of people with chemistry just in this one little experiment. You're like, I want to get into
an amazing colored gas. It's this really yellowish greenish.
Yes.
You've never seen anything like it.
I apologize for going there, and I'm so sorry, but I know everybody's thinking it. Is it like cartoon farts when it was?
It's close to it. I mean, it was wafting out of the crucible, and it was like, wow, that's a really interesting color. And then, why are my eyes burning?
So how much of your work revolves around because the chromat, there's like a lot of like chromata or chrome this, like, so I know some of your work has to do with like color and color variations, and like, so how much of your work involves like just shoving lasers through a crystal and seeing what shows up on the other side? Like,
the short answer is a lot.
Cool.
I know, Brad, you have a little bit of experience with solvetochromism. We do a lot with photochromism. So that is a color change in response to light. And yeah, that is a huge amount of the research that we do in my lab, is basically growing crystals, shining both lasers and X-rays on the crystals. And so the lasers are there to initiate a reaction, and then from a lot of our molecules, they form new bonds when you shine light on them. And the cool thing about that is it's a crystal, and you can solve crystal structures. So that's what we use the X-rays for, is basically to solve the crystal structure. So we've got basically a picture of the molecule, we shine light on it, we shine X-rays, and then we can actually watch the atoms move within the crystal and watch the crystal transform using X-rays. And then a lot of our systems, you shine a different color of light on the crystal, and it'll go backwards. It'll undo that reaction, and you'll go back to where you started. And so so we call these photo switches and things like that. Yeah, and they've got a lot of applications, potential applications in things like, you can imagine memory storage, right? Treating these things like a 0 or a 1. Drug release, right? You could imagine something opening up and letting out drugs, and electronics and things like that. So we primarily focus on a lot of the fundamental science, because these switches we'll say really easy, but I will say they're easier generally to study in solution, because they're just sort of rattling around. And when you put them in a crystal, some crazy stuff can happen. And that's what we're doing, is we're trying to figure out what is the crazy stuff that happens when you put these things in a crystalline solid, so that ultimately we can actually make crystalline solids with properties by design, right? We can say, oh, we want it to do this, you need to do X, Y, and Z.
Oh, wow. So that's really cool.
So I kind of know the answer already, just talking to you, and I've seen this on all your videos that I've shown for my students of how to grow crystals. But one thing that Dave and I, we don't, now that we don't have an issue with it, but we know our students tell us that they get it why we're entertaining. But all about relatability to students is a key thing with getting students interested.
Yeah.
And I got a question for you on this, but I just did a deep dive beforehand and looked at it, just thinking about, okay, I know you teach classes as professors, you teach classes, you got your service, you got your research. So I had to go to this very reputable site here of Rate My Prof, and I wanted to see what they had said about you. And we got some really good comments, like, you're awesome, coolest profs ever, fun and interactive lectures, takes feedback, really cool. What I really like is nice guy, cool ponytail.
Yeah, that's an older comment.
That was an older one. But then you see one of your earlier on one says, horrible at explaining concepts, scatterbrained. And so obviously you're great at interacting with the students and making your lectures very enjoyable, because all the comments on there were great. Now I'm assuming that first one was kind of from earlier in your career, because we all learned. But how do you see yourself being so relatable to your students and making it so the concept is fun? Because we know chemistry can be a pretty hard concept. I would assume you're more on the physical side, which I'm sorry, I'm more organic. So
well, my students have to make a lot of molecules, so we can relate there too. Yeah.
But what is your philosophy on making STEM be fun?
Yeah, it can be challenging. So I teach chemistry at all levels. So I teach graduate chemistry courses. I teach advanced undergraduate courses. I teach down Gen Chem, and I'm doing actually a freshman seminar. I'm teaching freshman seminar for the first time this year, which is exciting. But you're right that not everyone is absolutely thrilled. When we've got Gen Chem 101, it is not the case that 100% of the students are there because they're thrilled with chemistry. They want to learn chemistry and they're rip roaring ready to go. So, but that said, they need to learn chemistry because it's a foundational science. If you want to go into medicine, you need to understand chemistry. I mean, it's right up there with math, right? You really need to know some of the basics, and it can be challenging to reach them. But I do, especially I've been at this gig a while now, I realize how critical student engagement is, right? You read the one sort of not great comment. I wish that student had reached out to me and talked to me and said, hey, I'd really rather you do this better. But that's something I definitely try to do now, and try to let students know, like, hey, if there's something I can be doing better, please come talk to me. But in terms of engaging them, I think one thing that's really important is to understand what their lived experience is and what they're doing. And interestingly, this is one of the benefits of kind of being on social media and using social media, is you really get to see sort of what contemporary kids are up to. I mean, obviously there's a terrible dark side and whatnot to social media, but on the plus side, you sort of see what kids are watching because they're all watching this. And so the ability to relate through some of those things and cite some examples that show I'm not someone who just lives under a rock, and I'm a real person, I think is important. And so one thing I do with some of my lectures is I'll put in memes, and I always feel kind of dumb saying it. I put in memes, and I know that a lot of my colleagues probably are rolling their eyes, but I'll tell you what, that half a minute that you spend showing a meme gets people, it injects generally a little levity, and it gets people at least sort of amused to be there. And frankly, if I'm the only one who's doing it, then at least they know if they come to class, they're going to at least get a couple minutes of a chuckle. And again, I do my best to try and work in other things as I'm teaching, and I especially try to draw from my life experiences. So I don't have time for it here, but when I was teaching about lead batteries last semester, that was some lead battery is sort of the backstory to how I met my wife, and ultimately met my wife. And I shared with them a little bit of that anecdote, and who knows, maybe they thought it was an abject waste of time, but they got to know a little bit more about me. And again, that I'm a human being, and sometimes life is crazy, and that's the best you can do. But that's the cool thing also about being in chemistry, is you can show experiments and demonstrations. So we did the silver nitrate with a copper battery crystal live in class, and we're checking in on it through time to time, and they just like seeing it. They don't, no one really does a lot. There aren't any classes where you get like live demonstrations of something really neat, and chemistry has so much to to choose from in terms of really, really neat demonstrations. So I think that that all helps to, with the engagement, but really engagement is really important. Talking to the students during class, asking questions, trying to get some feedback, trying to get some life out of them. Sometimes it's tough. I tell you, it's not every day that everyone is all super hip, happy, ready to go. But I think also it's making the effort that they appreciate as well.
Oh, awesome.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll say one thing is, I mean, I like your story about the Leadberry meeting your wife. I've got the great story of I met my wife in calculus, so
there you go. There you go. Little math connection.
Exactly. We both struggled through it together. What were you gonna say, Dave?
Well, I love that you talked about how you're just being engaging and talking with students, and there are days when it's like pulling teeth. Mine's especially after lunch, the kids go and they eat 17 Crispitos and come back and nap in my sick, that's tough to do. But when I was doing my undergrad, I got a bachelor's of science in mathematics, and then I took like 4 or 5 classes on the side in education. And when I was doing my education classes, like I was writing these really cool lessons, and at the very end, I would say, "This would work if the kids were engaged, or it would work if I had motivated students." And so I talked to my professor. And I was like, "How do you motivate kids?" And the professor, she just looked at me and she goes, "That's the hardest thing that you'll ever have to do in education, and it all starts with developing a relationship." And so I almost wonder at the collegiate level. Are you in classroom sizes of like 15 or 1500? Like, what are you dealing with? And are you able to develop relationships, or do you not even care because, you're just there because you so you don't get fined? I don't know.
Yeah. So this semester is really an interesting one for me. I only have 19 students, and
Oh, wow.
I see them twice a week for 80 minutes, and it's really kind of neat. I'm getting to know them. It's the first class I've ever had where I had an assignment where it was we called it About Me, and they wrote up a little blurb about themselves, and I got to read from some very compelling life stories. But yeah, when I taught Gen Chem in the spring, it was 100 and something students, and there it's much more difficult to try to foster individual connections. And really what you do is you wind up sort of meeting a lot of the students that sit up front, or they come to your office hours and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's still important to be engaging. It's a tough order in a class of 100, 150, and some of our classes are even larger, 200 students. But that's why I say making the effort, I think, also just counts. Another thing that's really informed my perspective on being a teacher, or at least doing my best. I like to try to, never say I'm an effective teacher.
Right.
I let the students be the judge of that.
Correct.
But I recently went back and got my business degree, and so I was actually on the other side of the classroom. And I think that experience probably taught me. I probably learned more from just sitting there and reflecting on student-teacher interactions and watching the other students around me and how they were perceiving teachers and things like that. I probably learned just as much on that end as I did on the business end, and learning my accounting and all that other stuff. Because it was pretty clear that there were some faculty who really tried to be engaging and made a sincere effort, and sometimes it connected, sometimes it didn't, and then there were some faculty that were are arguably less engaging. And then that experience also happened during COVID, which was totally a crazy thing to see, because I was also still teaching and doing COVID, and it really informed a lot of some of the strategies I was personally using to try. And boy, you think it's tough to engage students sitting in front of you. Holy smokes! Talk about trying to engage 100 students on Zoom.
Yeah.
Holy smokes! So it's tough. I'm glad to be back in the. I'm really glad to be back in the classroom. But it's hard. And you just got to do your best, keep trying, keep asking. If you find people you think do a good job, do what you can to figure out what their secret sauce is. And
Yeah. And see, one thing that I'm working with a couple of new teachers at our school with is you're never going to be able to replicate what somebody else does, because teaching is not, it is a performative art. Honestly, it really is. But there's no way to replicate how somebody else teaches their class. So you have to do it in your own style, in your own voice, in your own way. And so when you go and observe like you did, I mean, taking classes is the best way to observe as an educator, by the way. Brilliant job. Doing that, I mean, you're stealing from them and making it your own. So to transition back into actual chemistry, I rarely get to talk to a real expert in chemistry.
Oh, thanks.
So I was watching a documentary about how the Romans built these incredible concrete structures underwater, right? And so in my mind, I'm somewhat learned, but I'm not brilliant. So in my mind, I'm thinking, all right, so when you mix the cement, right? You mix the dry powder with some water, the water evaporates and you're left with a solid. And then I was watching this documentary about it, and that's not the case. So lime, apparently in the powdered form, when the water mixes in with the lime, the water's not evaporating out. What ends up happening is that the lime turns into a crystal. So is it really true that concrete is just a really ugly crystal?
I wouldn't call it a crystal. It's certainly not like a single crystal by the textbook, but certainly it has crystalline structure. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not a concrete chemist. I'm not familiar with all the reactions that happen deep within there, but that's actually a really important part of curing concrete and whatnot and mixing it properly, is because if you don't follow the proper protocols and you don't get the right distribution of crystals and crystal sizes and how they're bonded together, you're not going to have the ideal properties, right? You're going to have a weaker concrete. It'll be more subject to being brittle and fracturing, or potentially taking on, if it's not fully reacted, it could take on additional water and then break. And so, yeah, it's similar to chocolate tempering. So tempering of chocolate is basically, where you want chocolate that's real crisp and snaps, right? If you just melt chocolate and then let it solidify, you get, kind of wonky. It doesn't have a real crisp crack to it. But tempered chocolate, the stuff, high-end chocolates and whatnot that snaps, that snapping comes about from the cocoa butter within the matrix growing a very specific type of crystal structure. So cocoa butter can actually have a few different crystal structures, but you have to get the one, and it has to be in there in the right concentration. And if you don't hit that, then you don't get these really fantastic properties of tempered chocolate. And I imagine it's the same thing for concrete. In fact, I'm looking to get my driveway redone, and I was looking at what is the best time of year to have concrete poured. And it turns out, if it's too hot, it's not good. If it's too cold, it's not good. Right around 50.
You only have like
degrees.
you only have like 6 weeks in Buffalo of it not being too cold.
Yeah, I was like, oh, this is a good time to do it.
But
But that's it. Is January. It's going to be too cold, and the last thing I want to do is pay money for a driveway that's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
Not to mention that 20 feet of snow you got last year.
That's never mind that too. That's right. Yeah.
So did you grow up in Arizona?
Yes.
All right. So growing up in Arizona and then moving to Buffalo, New York, like
but through Washington, right?
Through Washington. That's right. I did my PhD in Seattle. We've definitely lived in some pretty, contrasting climates. Yeah, I went to Arizona State. So definitely the hot Phoenix area. I was just there this summer. If you were watching the news and hearing about the heat wave in Phoenix, I was there for that. Lucky me. And but yeah. And then Seattle, quite a bit more mild, but definitely a lot of rain.
Yeah.
And then or mist sprinkle. But then to Buffalo, where there's a lot of snow. I did not see a lot of snow growing up, and I see a lot of snow now. Although I saw a lot of cacti growing up,
Right.
and I don't see a lot of cactus now.
That's wild, man. You like from the desert climb, all that. Which one is best for your allergy situation? Because I'm finding allergies are not awesome in the Midwest right now.
Yeah, I don't have allergies aren't too much my thing, but my wife definitely appreciates sort of the Seattle or the Buffalo over the Arizona because of just all the dust and everything like
That's
that.
fair.
So
that's fair.
Yeah.
So you're talking about, we've talked about now you went from Arizona, Washington over to Buffalo, and this is all because of being in the science field. What would you say is the coolest thing that you've got to do that science has allowed you to do, whether it be a travel or something you've done? I've seen you've gone to some Gordon research conferences. What's the coolest thing?
Yeah, so look, I love the travel. I love going to conferences. I love giving lectures at schools. I love being able to do interviews like this. All this stuff is really cool. But the one thing that I really like that is pretty unique and has been enabled by my career is my ability to go to national labs to do experiments, because as cool as university labs are and all the amazing stuff that's in a university lab, national labs are next level. The United States has invested a great deal of resources to make our national labs the crown jewels for science globally. And so my group, we take trips to the synchrotron, which is this gigantic, it's called a storage ring. It's about I believe a kilometer in diameter, and multi-billion-dollar facility. And its purpose is to make really, really bright X-rays that are also highly tunable. But the idea is, first and foremost, very, very bright X-rays. And with those super bright X-rays, we can study tiny crystals. We can study fast movements in crystals. And I mean, it's a giant storage ring there. This is where they're doing experiments on basically everything there. But they're going to be some of the best experiments you can possibly do on the globe. There are a couple exceptions because out in California, we also have the X-ray free electron laser, which is another multi-billion-dollar, absolutely incredible facility. But the ability to go to these facilities, to be there, to perform research, to meet those beamline scientists is really unique to the career, and something that I treasure every single time we go. It's really a very powerful experience. But on the fun side of things, being a professor, running the crystal competition, and just getting to visit classrooms and talk to kids about crystals is also right up there. It's pretty close to tied for number one. That is such a phenomenal experience as well.
That's awesome. Well, okay, I want to piggyback something here, but I did do some research, and I don't know have you ever looked at like the chemistry family tree? Have you heard of that?
I'm familiar with the concept.
So weirdly enough, we actually have a connection that.
Oh, really?
According to like the chemistry family tree, looking at it, we have a more notable connection, but technically, your grandfather would be Kurt Mislow, because Bart started with Kurt Mislow. My PhD advisor, Kathleen Kilway, worked under Jay Siegel, who has a tie to Mislow as well. So I guess we're cousins in a way. I don't know.
That sounds pretty good to me. But tell you what, we don't want to disqualify you.
But what's even cooler than that is from Mislow, that actually takes us up to Linus Pauling and then Niels Bohr. So we have it's kind of cool knowing that we have ties back to them from our education.
Yeah, wow. Wow, that's awesome.
So from that, who would you say, and this kind of ties in, both Dave and I actually do something in our class that we believe really brings more engagement. Of we do these, I do tournament of chemists, and he does the tournament of mathematicians, or mathematician of the year, where we have an NCAA type bracket where students vote every few days on a matchup of scientists from history or current times. And so it's cool to see who they like and why they like these people. But in your opinion, who would be the coolest person, or the most notable one that you've met, or who would be your chemist of the year or lifetime? Who's the big name for you?
Oh man. I that's a tough one. I don't know if I can give you just one name there. I feel like I'm familiar with a lot of contemporary scientists, but I'll tell you what. Scientists that some people I would absolutely just love to meet. I put at the top, and they weren't on your bracket. I did catch some of the bracket stuff, but were maybe some of the old Greeks, or some of these folks that were doing chemistry before it was chemistry, right? Where they're just figuring out these solids and doing these reactions, and they're doing all of this work in the absence of quantitative information, a knowledge of molecules, a knowledge of anything. I read some of those old papers, and even if you dig back in the literature into the 1800s and things like that, there are some absolutely fascinating articles, and some of the things that people were discovering and coming up with, again, before anything remotely close to modern instrumentation, before even the ideas of atoms and well, I guess there were ideas of atoms, but before this all really got going with the periodic table and whatnot, it just I am in such awe of some of the science that got performed in those eras. It is really just incredible.
My pea-sized brain thinks that chemistry was born out of alchemy. How wrong am I?
Yeah, look, I think they're pretty pretty similar. Yeah,
right. In my mind, I feel like Isaac Newton spent like way too much time trying to like come up with the right formula for gold. Right, alchemy is the study of trying to figure out how to come up with gold, and like chemistry is kind of in the word alchemy to begin with. So like I almost wonder like what's the historical connection between that?
Yeah, that you'll need to consult with an historian on things like that. But that's just it. Look, people were brewing beer and making wine, which is chemistry, baking bread,
Thousands
but not yeah, without knowing it was CO2 and so on. So that's why I say it's really pretty incredible, some of the things that humans thought up back in the day, as it were. But it's also really incredible what people are thinking of now, right? Ways to turn with greater and greater efficiency solar energy into electricity, and to do a lot of these things with an eye on sustainability. How do you try to capture some of this CO2 from the air? How do we try to come up with all of these sustainable means for energy production? And I'll just quickly say, one of the things that gets me sort of excited, and there was some recent breakthroughs, and it's definitely out of my area, but it's the quest for nuclear fusion, right? I just get so excited at the potential for nuclear fusion. I love teaching it, and like I said, I get a little excited, but boy, that's one technology that when that one starts hitting, it's going to be a real big deal for humanity, for sure.
Wow.
You talk about going back to when the ancient Greeks and all in the 1800s, of when what they were working with. I remember in grad school, like, oh, the NMR is down today. There goes my whole day.
That's right. Yeah, UV vis, right? And just even the idea, oh yeah, electrons, sure, absolutely. Yeah, we've got electronic structure and orbitals. Oh yeah, no problem. And that's relatively new in the timeline of humanity and how long people have been making metals, right? Metallurgy and the Bronze Age and whatnot. Yeah. Fascinating stuff. Absolutely fascinating stuff.
You have any other questions for him, Dave?
Well, I mean, I could keep going for hours.
Yeah.
I obviously I got a load of questions. I just wanted to make sure you got a chance to ask him everything you wanted to ask.
I've got the main ones that I was getting to for, so go ahead.
All right. Well, STEM to me is science, technology, engineering, mathematics, right? So engineering to me is solving problems, applications, solving problems. Technology is developing new tools to help out in all areas. Mathematics obviously is mathematics. But to me, science, the science part of STEM, I see it as asking questions and then designing experiments to try and answer those questions. So, as a scientist, what questions are you currently trying to answer or come up with?
Yeah.
Piggyback off of that real quick. To piggyback off of that, where do you come up with questions to ask?
Yeah, well, it's a complicated. First, where do I come up with the questions? It's a complicated process. Sometimes they strike in the shower. Yeah. Sometimes they strike in a dream, and you wake up. Oh my gosh, that's an interesting idea. Other times you see what people are doing, and you think, oh, wait a minute, I could take that this direction. So inspiration can strike in a lot of places. One means by which for generating ideas that I find particularly gratifying and exciting is when I get my students involved and my students start generating ideas for experiments. Yeah. Hey, we want to answer this question. Let's design this experiment to do that. And I think that that's one of the things that we try to teach as science educators, especially in a laboratory setting, is how do you craft a testable hypothesis? Because there's lots of hypotheses about lots of things, but is it testable? Is it something that you can design an experiment around? And is the experiment going to be designed in such a way that it'll actually answer that question? And sometimes that can be very hard to do. So that's sort of the general gist of where it goes. Part of it too is as a scientist in the United States, the other piece of the pie is you need to be able to convince others that what you're doing is important and worthwhile, such that you can apply for funding to get your research funded. Without money, it is very difficult to do research. So some of the questions that we're answering, like I said, are center around the basics of photochemistry in the solid state. When we start to make these crystals, and some of the crystals we make are sort of cutting edge and very new because they have very specific types of what are termed non-covalent interactions within the lattice. How do those interactions impact the electronic structure and ultimately the photochemistry that we observe in the lattice? So those are some of the questions that we ask. And like I said, there are properties that can be tied to certain molecular properties. And so you have the property of the molecule, but then you grow a crystal. And how does the molecular property influence the property of the crystal, and vice versa, and things like that? So those are some of the questions that we typically are going after. And we do that through a lot of X-ray, looking at structures, then going and measuring properties and trying to make some changes. If we change this, we predict it's going to do this. We make that change, we grow that crystal, we make that measurement, and find out if we were right or if we were wrong. and that is science in a nutshell.
That's awesome. Because it's interesting that you say, you make one adjustment and then see what happens. I try and teach that in my math class and certain problem solving strategies that we go through. I tell them to make one change and see what happens and observe that change. Because that's going to tell you whether a graph is moving left to right or up or down. Whatever it is that we're looking at the time, just do one change instead of trying to rewrite the whole thing. Start from scratch every single time. If you take a look at just one thing, your observations are going to be much more powerful. That was good, man. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, in full disclosure, we try to change one thing, and then in the world of crystal growth and growing crystals, more often than not, about 1 billion things change.
Right, the bottom falls
So
out.
we're doing our best. We're doing our best.
I'm so excited for you for this year, for this competition. Hopefully it's the best one that you've ever had. I'm definitely gonna make sure my school is at worst aware, but hopefully at best we can, place in this thing. I think that would be really cool if we could get our kids excited. I know our chem teacher at our school is does several units on growing crystals, and she worked with my son on trying to grow some, but I couldn't get him too hooked yet. So maybe soon.
Yeah. Well, the deadline to register is October 1st. So
wow, so we gotta get going.
Order the materials because the contest starts in mid-October. So
sweet. Well, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Benedict. I really appreciate it. This has been super enlightening. I've learned a lot, which is my personal goal every time we do something like this. I want to learn and learn and learn and learn. So thank you for satisfying that itch. I really appreciate it.
As I said, thank you so much. I've enjoyed working with you just through email over the last couple of years in terms of working with the crystal competition, but it's nice to actually get to talk to you and put all this together. This has been a fantastic time for us as well.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. If you guys ever have crystal questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I have to say, again, to raise the next generation of scientists takes this village of educators, parents who care, and work hard to get students interested in science. Maybe someday a crystal growing kid will become a crystallographer, but you know what? At a minimum, if there's someone who just gets interested in science, does a better job of thinking critically and searching for the truth, we're going to call that a win. So thank you so much for the invitation to be here.
Well, hopefully one day you'll want to tell people that you were the first guest ever on How Do You Like STEM Apples podcast.
Oh, absolutely. I am just thrilled beyond words. Thank you so much, guys, for having me here.
You're the best, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take it easy.